So this is the POP workshop. What we want to do is just talk about some of the learnings of the pool onboarding proposal process, and talk a little bit about three things. One, what did we learn and what are the impressions from the group here on the call over the last 6 months? What are the ideas that we have to improve the POP that haven't been voiced either in writing or in conversations to date? And then as we think about kind of the requirements, or maybe just what we have to have in version 2 of the POP and the right way to bring the POP through governance, kind of looking at you, Rano, and other ambassadors, is thinking a little bit about not only what does it have to have and what should it achieve, but what's the right way to do that through the community and through governance. So that's the agenda for today. Obviously, a little context, the POP began, I think the first version that's been up and running has been up since like early April. So we're coming up on, or a little past 6 months now, which is probably a great time to check in on this. And with all the work that is going on in the community and through governance, including some of the work that'll be coming down the pipeline through the credit group, understanding what we need to do to indicate to all of DeFi or TradFi, anyone that wants to finance real world assets, how to do that through Centrifuge in the right way is the overall context of this call. So that's the agenda that I've laid out in the post, and we can talk a little bit more about anything else. Any other questions or topics folks want to cover, let's do that. If not, I'll just copy and paste the agenda into the chat so that folks have it, and we'll go from there. So with that in mind, I can talk if people want me to give some of my thoughts, but I'd rather hear impressions from everyone here on the call. What's been learned, or what are your impressions, things that you've seen work well or not so well over the last 6 months?
I can start with some input, because I have been scoring the POPs that have been on the forum, the submissions, and we've had 10 so far since this process began, and most of them have passed. But what I've noticed is that there is not much engagement around these submissions. There are not enough activity, not enough people participating in the discussion. So that's one thing we can improve. And I also noticed that in terms of the criteria, which themselves are good, the criteria that can be improved. I'll come back to that later. But the criteria themselves are good, but there are some criteria that I believe are more important than others. And the way the system works now is that they should just pass any 7 out of those 10 criteria. And I can just link to those criteria here in the chat. So if anyone wants to go and have them refreshed, they are here.
Thank you.
They are, there's nothing wrong with the criteria themselves, but I think they can be more precise. So define them a little bit more clearly, what is required in order for a POP to pass the first stage. So that's my look on it so far. And maybe we can, looking at the overall process, maybe it could be narrowed down a little bit. There were a lot of voting involved, so maybe limit that or reduce that to fewer voting or polls. That was polls before, now we don't have polls anymore, so now it's going to be snapshot voting. But that's my take on it so far. I'm not a financial expert, so I won't be able to look at each of the information that's provided and analyze them. But I think we should make it very clear, the criteria, what they should be and what is required for it to pass, because some of them now is a little bit difficult to judge whether is it a go or a no-go based on what is written. So that's what I have noticed about the process.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I can jump in. Hi everyone. I've noticed that, yeah, I guess in the last 6 months, probably been quite disappointed with the level of engagement from the community on some of the posts. I thought maybe they would get more people kind of jumping in and analyzing it and giving their 2 cents. I think maybe one of the reasons, if I think about the ones that I've posted on and the ones I haven't posted on, like if it's something if it's like like an asset class I don't really understand, I'm less likely to want to give my view on it, because I think there are probably better qualified people in the community to do that than me. So maybe part of it is like people feel like there's quite a big barrier to entry to like giving your thoughts on quite a often well thought out, in-depth process that people have gone through, and actually they're really selling themselves in the best possible light. So if you don't necessarily understand like a huge amount about it, you might not be willing to critique it. But I found the process, like I found the structuring quite easy to read, as in like most of the people who have posted. I've generally found it quite easy to kind of follow what they're saying, and the exact summaries are quite good. So I think the kind of quality of people posting tends to be quite good, at least the way that their like written standard is quite good.
Cool.
I'm happy to jump in as well. So this is Rokeley, recent POP submitter with the Havenly Digital POP. A couple things I think that we noticed as we were doing it, and I think Orhan touched on some of these. Perhaps a bit more clarification and guidance on the expected nature of response for the questions. Some of them we got there eventually, but at initial read, it felt like it could have been a bit more specific as to what the POP was asking for.
What's specifically there, Rokeley? That'd be helpful to know.
Sorry?
What specifically would you want more clarity on of what the POP wants to know?
Let me bring that up and circle back at the end of my comments.
Cool.
The other thing I think that we noticed was there wasn't a clear point of contact if we had any questions on the POP. And so I don't know if there's a option on the community forum for some sort of Q&A or something like a POP ambassador or chaperone to help entities that may not be fully familiar with this new DeFi economy on how the communities work, how DeFi works, what sort of responses will resonate with the forum members. And then I guess just as a third point, and this is I guess less related to the POP and more just about the overall DAO mechanics and rate margins. What we're currently looking at is trying to construct a calculator to understand with our assets and our lending rates, and then the investor rates that we're offering, trying to anticipate possible maker vault rates, putting all that into a spreadsheet to try to calculate, well, what are we looking at from an actual cash flow and margin perspective? So sort of those types of tools and utilities might be beneficial as well to issuers.
And you would Rokeley, you just call that a rate calculator, that third one, the tools and utilities?
Yeah. So having read through the sort of the user guide, the online user guide, what we're currently trying to figure out is, if we're lending to our, the mortgage borrower at X%, and we want to offer Y% in the senior tranche, at whatever, cash ratio, with an anticipated, say, 3% credit rates on a maker vault. How does that shake out in terms of our rates and cash flows, in terms of our own margins and impact on the junior tranche as well?
Would you be willing to share that publicly, Rogley, if that tool were available?
Yeah, we don't have anything finalized at the moment, but yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share at least a template of what we've come up with as we get it finalized.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be like a great thing to see, like from like a community post, right? Like kind of proposing like whatever tool you're building, whatever rate calculator you're using, having others in the community kind of like suggest these ideas is and kind of show us the work you're doing is incredibly helpful. So I think that's a great suggestion and one that we could collaborate on.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
I think that is a good idea. It could also be led in if you came up with a rate calculator and you submitted it from like a borrower's perspective, then those in the community from like a lender's perspective can give their view as well. See like where they think the kind of appropriate what the kind of appropriate return is. Like then it's just transparent and everyone kind of talks about it publicly.
So in terms of the specific questions on the POP that I think we struggled with was around the bottom. It was some of the financials, looking at the senior tranche rates, the borrow rates we knew, but the senior tranche rates coupled with discussions of our target spread and origination fees. So that sort of dovetails in with that rate calculator. We had to spend a fair amount of thinking on that to say, well, what's a reasonable proposal to put here, given that when we submitted the POP, we haven't fully finalized our cash flow model. So I think, yeah, that was one point of area that seemed a bit sort of difficult to advise on up front.
And you hadn't finished the cash flow model yet because you hadn't yet really figured out or determined what your, the cost of your senior capital would be. Is that right?
Yes. So things like the NAV calc, the any sort of credit rate coming out of a maker vault, those are unknowns for us. Yep. So we had to hazard some guesses as to what we thought our NAV would land at, and what cost of credit would be, coming out of the DAO space or DAI space. Sorry.
Yep. It's really helpful, Rogley. Thank you. Anything else from your side, or if not, we can open it up to others.
Yeah, no, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I noticed that there was even though the process was set out very clearly, some applicants still struggled to understand how to put themselves through the process and did kind of seem to need some more support. Perhaps this could be fixed with more tools or more guidance from someone doing that. But yeah, we saw a lot of questions in the Discord about, I've done this, now what do I do? Which maybe we can never avoid that, but I think we can do a bit more to just have, the guide, everything in a kind of one place with each step kind of very clearly drawn out. And in the new simplified version, I think that's going to be much easier. I echo what Orhan and Justin said about the community participation. I think it's quite to be expected, as Justin points out. It is a high subject matter expertise to give, and it is kind of the credit group is going to play a big role here, right? But I think we can't rely on them alone, and that would be really interesting once we start to do a bit more groups of delegates in terms of our governance, if we can think about the asset group. And it'd be really interesting to hear more from Justin and others who know about different asset classes, how would that work? Because I know Justin said you know about some assets, but not others. So within that group, could we even like find people with different experience to help where the credit group is unable to give an opinion, or we just actually want more input from the community? Because I do agree that like for most people, it's hard to comment on this. And this is a good reflection about our community as well, that our next kind of stage needs to be making this the hub for the forum. Basically needs to become the hub, the place to find out where the experts and our RWAs hang out. And we're not there yet. And that is going to be a big piece of work. And we need to start to draw people who also own CFG to our forum as like the place where cutting edge thinking happens around pools and RWAs. So that's something that I'm going to take on from this feedback, I guess.
I have a question there, Kate. When you say that, like a part of the language you use sounded very centrifuge specific when you talked about like CFG holders, but then some of the language you used there sounded much broader as making like the Centrifuge forum the place to hang out for anyone in DeFi almost that has an expertise or a view on real world assets. Which one is it, or could it be both? Do you have a view on that?
Hopefully both.
Okay.
I don't know exactly how yet, but I mean, if we have like some of an expert in DeFi hanging out on our forum and engaging in these pops and giving their opinion, I would also want them to be a CFG holder to engage in the voting part.
Yes.
As well. So let's figure out how that works. But yeah, that's the aim, and that's going to be the focus of some work for the next 6 months. That would love input on. Perhaps it's another workshop.
Thanks, Kate. It's helpful. Anyone that didn't yet give feedback or want to give feedback on this point? Again, the question was, what did we learn, or what impressions did you have personally about the POP over the last 6 months? I have some questions to ask as follow-ups, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to comment here. Okay. So with that in mind, let's move to, before we move to question 2, I have a couple of questions I want to ask to the group here that I think may inform what ideas we have to improve the POP. But here were 3 questions that I think emerged most clearly from those 4 people who gave feedback. And thank you again for doing that. So Oran, Justin, Rokley, and Kate. I think, Justin, you're hitting on something here that's important, which is that subject matter expertise, not even on an asset class basis, but just like understanding private credit and the way it works. To be blunt, I get out of my depth pretty quick. And there's a lot of people in the community that are far smarter than me, specific to private credit. But it doesn't mean that we don't want the community engaging. So maybe a question of the group is, it sounds like consensus is that, and Rokley, you'd probably echo this, is that for POPs, there's not much engagement happening once you submit the POP outside of Oran or the ambassadors scoring it. So what ideas do we have to get the community more engaged?
My opinion is, and I mentioned it already in Discord and in other groups, we need to simplify the process. That sounds simple, but if we want to engage the community, the average Joe and the average chain, we need to simplify it. I have a simple proposal or idea, because Reino mentioned the criteria, the 10 criteria, which are obviously really important when someone wants to launch a pool. And Kate mentioned tools. Which tools could we implement to make the process a little bit easier? I don't have a tool, but it's just my idea is, why not to use a simple checklist for the issuer before he submits the proposal, and this checklist could be used for the community or for someone who wants to score the criteria. Checklist, really simple. We have 1 criteria. which ones do we have? First one, business years in operation, 2 years, met, not met, check. Next criteria, what do we have? Yeah, pool value at launch 10 million. Yes, no, check, and so on. And when the issue sees he has 3 out of 10, then actually the serious question should be, is my pool suitable to be launched within the POP process? And this saves the issue a lot of work. And so this is the first scoring. I don't say he or she shouldn't submit the proposal, but it is a first indicator, and it is an indicator for everyone who wants to score the criteria from the community. Easy and simple. That's my proposal.
I agree with Christian with the majority what he says, but in terms of making engaging the community by making it more simple, I'm not sure if that will help by making it more simple. I mean, we can make the criteria more precise, and so it's very obvious what the criteria should be in order to pass. But there are still a lot of financial expressions and terms as it should be. And I don't know how that could be simplified to make the average community member to engage, because they would still not understand the majority of those expressions, even it was simplified. So I don't think that part will increase the participation by making it more simple, because the people we ideally want to engage in this are financial experts. And whether you simplify it or not, they will probably understand the content of the POP. So, but everything else you say, like having a checklist and these things, they make perfectly sense, and make it more clear. So have the criteria, say, this is the criteria, it should be this, like pool value at launch should be this, and after 1 year, it should be this, and drop tranche, you should be able to finance this particular amount or whatever way, but make it very, very precise and very specific, so it doesn't leave anything to someone's own interpretation. So that's my view. So a lot of the way I agree with you, Christian, but I don't think simplifying the process will make more people engaged in the process.
Yeah, that definitely I agree with you, Rainer. What about the glossa? Because we talked about it in Discord, and I don't know if you know it already. I didn't know it, and I still don't know it. What's a loan tape, for example? A loan tape, just all the criteria which are mentioned to make a glossa that everyone understands it.
Well, let me ask another question here. I don't even know how many CFG holders there are, but I think the question we want to ask is, let me make a more of a binary kind of A/B question, which is, let's say 100 pops come through version 2. Is there anything that you can do through a forum to get more engaged? Is there anything we could do to get more people to participate in the conversation? I think the answer to that is no. So the question I would ask is, do we think the average Joe, as Tom John has put it here, do we think the average Joe actually wants to engage with someone like Rokeley at Haven Digital, or any of the pops that have come through? Or is the voice of the community or better represented through almost like focus groups? Obviously the credit group is one of the ideas out there, but Justin, thinking about your comments about asset level expertise, should there be groups of people that know specific asset classes, or people that know certain geographies to start to comment on this stuff, rather than trying to run a process or expecting or setting the engagement bar, the engagement expectation from the community that anytime a POP submitted, we expect people to engage. I think that might be a bit idealistic in my mind.
Can I say that I do think it's idealistic, unless it's the right point. Like if we have a group of people that have a general community member, they need to come in at the right point, right? Not at the beginning necessarily, because they might not have the expertise or anything to add, but maybe they have something to add once the POP has been through the process a bit. Like towards the end, there's a question around, is this in keeping with the Centrifuge mission? Does this, take us forward in what we're trying to do? Is this safe enough to try? Like a broad question could be something that's more amenable to community engagement, rather than expecting the general punter to be able to go deep in the beginning.
I agree with, sorry, I have to chime in. I agree with Kate. We don't need everyone to participate in the forum, because the process it's a long process. So we don't need 100 people commenting in the forum or participating in the scoring. But what we need in the end, definitely, we need more people who participate in the voting, the snapshot vote, in the, I don't know, once there is a on-chain vote. If we have 50 people who vote on the V2, then we can leave it. Then it's not too much. So that definitely, then we need the engagement of the community.
Christian, can you say that again? Just a bit shorter for me. I missed some of it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we don't need everyone to participate in the forum to make comments and to score, but the process is longer. So we need a lot of engagement when it comes to voting. When it says thumbs up, yeah, we want to have the POP, the proposal submitted or implemented, and then then we need a lot of participation from the community in terms of voting.
So does everyone agree with that? That's an important point. So what you're saying, Christian, is that we don't need everyone commenting on every single POP, right? That's not what we need the community and CFG holders doing. What we are looking for, though, is that once enough information has been gathered, qualified, and presented back to the community, and the community's asked for a vote, that's where we're looking for increasing levels of engagement through snapshot voting.
Yeah, obviously what we need in the forum is, Justin mentioned it, we need qualified people who understand what they're talking about. That's the main point, because I have to admit, I am no financial guy. I don't understand a lot what's written there in the submissions. So maybe I'm not the best person who should comment and ask questions. I do it, I try it, but yeah, probably there are more financially advanced people who understand it better, who understand the whole subject better. But what I definitely see, yeah, I can vote, or others can vote. And I saw the question in the chat as well. So what do we need? Experts, financial experts, or the average Joe? And for the whole process, we need all of them, in my opinion.
But then let me ask you this, like, what happens when an average Joe votes in a snapshot? I'm not saying they shouldn't, I'm just throwing this out because I just started thinking about it now, but what happens when they vote in a snapshot vote? What makes us think that they are actually able to make a decision now when they weren't able to do it in the comments? So voting for something, what do you say? Voting on a snapshot vote where they didn't understand it in the submission phase, then are they able to make a sound decision and vote?
Personally, if you ask me, no, they aren't. But we have experts. We have the credit group. We have the score. Someone scores it. We have the financial advanced guys who can say this is a good proposal. So we have a lot of other actors, and based on that, it's a long process, as I said. So it's not only that you start with the vote. There are steps before the voting, and yeah, you can exclude a lot of mistakes. So
But
and you
when-
should trust the experts, in my opinion.
yeah, and that's the point, right? Like at the point at which we arrive to the open square vote, there would have been an opinion produced, right? That says, this is what I foresee, like, yes, this meets the criteria, this is good for the protocol. And so based on that, like, people can still vote no, but at least there's been an opinion produced by experts. And there has been like a lot of discourse happening, which can actually inform the general user. And maybe in the beginning, like, okay, it's going to take a while, but we may start to see people who actually really do understand this process. And at the same time, as we draw more people into our community from finance, we've got to try this, I guess. Like, we do need community input on where the pools go on chain at some point in this process, and it should be informed by experts. So it's a matter of designing the flow of how that happens. And I'm interested in this point, Colin. I don't know if you want to jump into it from Jan about incentives for voting. What do you think about that?
Just to recap where we landed on that is that I think I agree with the sentiment that we want perhaps to increase engagement. I think we need to let the experts do the expert work earlier on in the POP process, and have more dialogue and do more work on behalf of the community earlier in the POP process. That's one thing that I would encapsulate. I think second is we need to have less votes, but more important votes later on, once the information has been distilled and can be presented to the community in a way that they can actually vote on it. So those are two big pieces I'm taking away. Now, to Damjan's point, I think there is no incentive to vote at this time because you're not really making a meaningful impact on the protocol, on all the POPs that exist right now. My view is that if there were large amounts of assets or large amounts of money, or let's say someone wanted to finance assets from a very, I don't know, assets that might not be so, what's the right word here? Not easy to digest, maybe controversial assets, right? If someone wanted to finance controversial assets, then perhaps you would vote very strongly and say, hey, I think this puts our protocol at risk or something of that nature. So I think the incentive of just giving people more CFG or using tokenomics to try and incentivize people to vote with the process we have today is fixing a leaky bucket and is not the right solution. I think we need a better process. And I think when we do ask the community to vote, I think we need to be more clear about what that vote represents and what's at stake. That's probably the wrong word to use, but what's at risk if you don't vote or if you do vote. I think it needs to be later on. And the community needs, to Damjan's point, the average Joe needs to be able to simply understand what they're voting on and why that's important. And with, I think the current process has like 3 to 4 different votes in it. It's just too many. So I think there's work to do to clean it up so that the vote you make really impacts the future of the protocol and you feel like you're making a difference.
100%, Colin. And part of this is that it's good that you're here, Damjan, saying that you still wouldn't vote, and we need to work with that, right? And I think that there's a part of this is about communication and marketing. Like, you want to be part of this world-leading DAO that actually is doing, credit and putting pools on chain in a way that no one else is doing. And this is super exciting. And so how can we make it, people want to be part of this, be part of this group who are like changing the way finance is done. So, and also how does that relate to our education program around this, right? So, okay, average Joe or Jane may not know what
I think Kate's frozen for me. Is that just me? Or is everybody, it's frozen for everybody
marketing,
else?
sorry.
All right, cool, just me. Wait, Kate, I think you're back now. You are.
Okay, so I'll finish
Okay.
off my point. It's like education campaign, marketing campaign as another corollary to this whole process that I think will help us. And I'm happy to participate and help with this if you think it's valuable.
I think it's valuable. I want to turn back to the issuer side for a second and some of the feedback that Rokeley gave. And I think it's also feedback others gave, which is the question is how do we help issuers be better prepared for when they submit a POP? And I think Rokeley made a good point here, which is like if he could talk to an issuer who had already been through the process of the POP or had already launched a pool in Centrifuge, that would be really helpful. So I think it's important to acknowledge that of all the POPs that were submitted, I think there were 10 or 11, as you said, Oren, 0 of them even made it to stage 2, where they're getting looked at through like the credit group or some other group or taken very seriously. No one made it through quote stage 1. And that's absolutely a failure of the POP process as it was designed in V1. And that's why we're here today to do better in V2. One thing I want to center in on is that, and this comes back to Kate's point around communication and marketing. I strongly believe that the POP and Centrifuge as a whole have not communicated what the POP is about. Historically, I think people understand, assume, and I think rightly assume because we haven't educated the market properly that if you launch a pool, the funding is there on the other side. And I think that is, at one, it's 100% incorrect. And 2, if that's incorrect, then the expectation we're setting with the POP, I think, is also wrong and dangerous, right? Because we're wasting people's time and they don't clearly know what they're doing when they submit a POP. And so that's something that I think we should discuss. It's my very strong opinion, and I'll share it here with everyone, that POPs should be figuring out their financing sources before they come through the POP process. Meaning, if you're going to propose to launch a pool through Centrifuge, you should be able to articulate who is going to be funding your pool if the pool were to pass the POP process. Now, I know that might be, people may disagree with that, but I think the alternative is a worse outcome, which means you have a bunch of pools launching, they launch, they spend the money, the time, the energy, the resourcing, and there's no money to fund the assets that they need to finance through Centrifuge. So I want to open this up for the group and see, 1, do people agree with some of the stuff I said there? But 2, what are other ideas do you have around how we can be more clear around what the POP is actually for?
I'll jump in on that because I think I did see your recent question on that exact point.
Yep.
And I'll confess, in our understanding of the Centrifuge platform, we understood it to be a market maker platform. The purpose, of connecting issuers and investors. The requirement to bring your own investors to the table, I think, somewhat undermines the value proposition. And I mean, quite simply, if I've already got the assets and I've already got investors, why do I need Centrifuge? So I think this starts to dovetail perhaps into the point Kate raised about marketing, which is one of the things that, one of our open questions is, what is Centrifuge's current reach from a user community? What is its marketing plan? How does Centrifuge advertise itself out there? I mean, personally, I think there's huge opportunity with what you've built. Investor appetite, not only on the retail side, but arguably even on the institutional side, as a disintermediated mechanism, to preserve higher yield throughput is phenomenal. And when we look at things like U.S. mortgage market, where traditionally the investors are, the GSEs of, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and so on, with strict underwriting guidelines, that's really constraining for mortgage originators. There are, I think, numerous origination firms that would love to find alternate sources of investor liquidity outside of your traditional GSE. And to me, Centrifuge is the ideal platform to start bridging that gap. But again, that's predicated on the idea that Centrifuge is actively marketing itself to a wider investor community and bringing investors in to the pools. So I'll pause there. That was probably a bit of information, but I think we were a bit confused by the feedback, but I think you've clarified it. Is the expectation from Centrifuge that we bring our own investors to the platform? We hadn't planned to bring some, but certainly I think we were hoping through the pool launch itself, that would open up access to other investors, without our direct solicitation.
Well said. I've got thoughts, but I'll pause to see if the group has thoughts. Okay. So I would summarize, that feedback and that thinking, and this is on Centrifuge to fix, to Rokeley's point, which is, the question is Centrifuge an intermediary or is Centrifuge infrastructure, right? And 10 out of 10 times we are going to say we're infrastructure. And there are other businesses, there are other protocols that do the work of bringing capital to specific pools. Now, I think building the ecosystem around this infrastructure is the responsibility of the Centrifuge community and all of us here, right? But the ability, it's two things. We need to both be building the amount of potential channels by which groups like Havenly Digital can access capital, but and make that information available. So almost like a how to bring capital to your Centrifuge pool, if you will, like a how-to guide is the way I think about it. But also be clear that the Centrifuge community or the team is not responsible for bringing that capital to the table. It's almost about showing the way and showing the how versus doing the work on behalf of any one single pool. Does that make sense, Rokeley?
It does, and I get the distinction, I guess, between sort of market making platform versus infrastructure. So maybe there's a way then to leverage your community members and issuer community to incentivize, bringing investment to the platform.
Yep. One of the things I've found in a lot of conversations I've had is that the posts that you've made, so the POP template and the way it works, actually serves as a billboard for an issuer to take into other DeFi protocols Dow Treasuries, or potential investors that you're looking to speak with, right? To express your intention publicly of what you're looking to achieve through Centrifuge. What I think is difficult is it is the chicken and the egg, which is if the capital is going to flow to your pool on chain, obviously you want to securitize and structure the deal on chain so that the capital that's on chain can flow into your Centrifuge pool, right? That I think is why you would want to use Centrifuge, because you're using investors that are natively on chain and want to invest on chain with stable coins. What's a little bit more unclear is if you want to finance assets through Centrifuge, who should you be sharing this information with? And you've mentioned Maker a couple of times, and I think they serve as probably the clearest example of that, but I don't think they're the only example of that. And making it clear who Centrifuge has worked with and where, available capital sources that have invested into pools or would invest into future pools, I can appreciate roughly that's pretty opaque. And so I think I would be curious if the group agrees that from an infrastructure play, a great pool onboarding proposal would be large, a good investment opportunity, and already be supported through its initial launch phase, whether that be 1 million or 100 million in AUM. But the vision would be, I think, that once that pool was launched, that you had the ability to grow it by significant amounts or grow it through the Centrifuge community once the pool was launched. But I think assuming to launch a pop and that the money is there on the other side is not the right outcome. And I think there's work to do to clarify that for issuers. So I'll pause for thoughts from the group.
I mean, just to jump in again, I mean, yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I think another point to consider is in just positionally where you've, positioned yourself as connecting real world assets to digitally native investors. It's important. I think I mean, in many aspects, I think it's, the future. But I think we have to understand the demographics between the two markets. Real world markets, traditional finance, tend not to have a lot of exposure to the digital native investor side and vice versa. So I think just in terms of bridging that gap on the investor side, if you've got the infrastructure that bridges it technically at the financial level, yeah, maybe a point to look at, and I'm sort of saying this broadly and including to myself as well, is how does a traditional brick and mortar company such as a mortgage firm effectively market its digital assets online to a native digital investor community? That is a bit of a leap for them. It's not insurmountable, but it's certainly new.
Say that last part again, Berkeley.
So I'll try and do it in simpler terms.
No, I thought you were good. It's just I'm trying to get it into a soundbite that I can quickly understand.
Yeah, no, I'm sort of forming the thought as it's coming out. In essence, a lot of your issuers are likely to be brick and mortar companies who aren't fully familiar with the on-chain space. And what we're asking is for them to somehow bring to the table these digitally native investors. And I think that in itself is somewhat of a tall ask. Just because what we're essentially saying is, as a brick and mortar mortgage company, we should be somehow soliciting investment from a digital community that's going to be net new, I think, to most of your investors, issuers, sorry.
Yep.
And I say that because we're going through the process at the moment, right?
Yep.
We are speaking to a number of private investors, and it is an educational journey for them. We're having to introduce them to some of the basics of blockchain, of wallets, of how to connect the wallet, what it means to be in a digital currency. And that's a pretty big, I guess, educational and marketing journey. Again, and I think it's unique to Centrifuge because in bridging the gap between real world and digital assets, you're really looking at two different user communities. You're looking at traditional finance on the issuer side. You're looking at digital natives on the investor side. And yeah, so it's while you've got the technical platform there to bridge the finance, it's the marketing I'm saying that seems unattended.
I can chime in here. I have an idea, or that's a really, really a good point because we are in blockchain already, and it's really good to have this input because this is a valid, huge point. We are talking about people who maybe never used the cryptocurrency before, and to educate them from the basics, that's really important. And we, from our side, we have a community section in the forum, and we created several user manuals, user guides. For example, how to create a wallet address, how to get a CFG account, really from the basics. And Reino, I guess you agree. Our goal is to grow this platform even further, to have more education, to have more content, that everyone who is new to the ecosystem or to blockchain, can understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We found the community and user guides very helpful. And don't get me wrong, I mean, this is not intended to be a criticism by any stretch. I'm actually a really huge fan of the platform. You just highlighting that you're really looking at, on the one hand, on the issuer side, traditional finance, brick and mortar, probably very low exposure to blockchain. And on the investor side, yeah, digital natives. And I think, as you know, we've heard on the call, maybe not a lot of traditional finance experience. So whilst the technical infrastructure is in place to manage the financing, it feels like there's another layer of infrastructure that could be in place to manage the marketing, the engagement, again, to help bridge the gap between traditional finance at the language level or marketing level and the digital space.
So 1 minute left, interest of time. I want to end on that point, which is I think there's 2 points being made here that are both community engagement piece. I understand now, which is that if I'm going to vote, make my vote worth it further down the line, right? And I need better information that the average Joe can understand and what the impact is of my vote if you're asking me to vote. The second point that I think Rokeley is well articulated here is actually twofold, which is if I'm brick and mortar or a traditional issuer, and I'm trying to convince private investors to distribute capital into my pool on Centrifuge, help me do it. Give me the marketing materials and the educational materials so I can actually articulate that more clearly, because that grows the ecosystem for private credit on chain. The second point that I think is interesting here is if you don't want me to submit I'm speaking for Rokeley here. If I'm Rokeley, I'm thinking out loud, and you're asking me to submit a POP, that's fine. In order to go through a governance process, I understand that. But if you're telling me I need to have money at the table beforehand, that's also okay. But if I'm bringing off-chain capital, tell me how, or give me a guide on how to access digitally native or crypto native capital that may be interested in funding my pool, should it pass the POP process. Rokeley, did I capture both of those points well?
Exactly. Thank you for that.
I think marketing and education are crucial here. Cool. All right, I will write this back to the group. We'll share the video, Rano, I guess, on the POP workshop. And I would imagine there will be more conversations we have from here. But Rokeley, thank you for being here. It's really helpful to get your feedback, and everyone that's here. Xander, appreciate all the comments. I'll take a look at them. And really, I mean, everyone for being here is really helpful. A lot to think about. So let me digest it, and we'll all kind of take next steps from there.
Okay, thanks. Nice meeting you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Ryan, it was very helpful.
Cheers all. Bye.